The European Union went to Brazil last month with high ambitions for climate action, despite infighting at home. Hosted by Brazil in the Amazon city Belém, countries from around the globe came together for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, better known as COP30. But for the EU itself and other observers, the global negotiations on climate change fell short of the momentum many had hoped they would generate.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I were to sum up and express just in a couple of words what in my view the gist of the COP is, then I would summarize it as important steps forward, but more would have been better.
There was some important progress over the past 2 days. We would like still to see more concrete measures.
In 2015, 194 countries and the EU adopted the Paris Agreement, agreeing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to keep average global temperature change below 2 degrees Celsius and as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. To accomplish this, they agreed to submit so-called nationally determined contributions, which represent their individual targets to reduce emissions. Just days before the UN conference began, the EU agreed its own new targets to bring to the table in Belém. Member states pledged to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 66.25 to 72.5% below 1990 levels by 2035 and as much as 90% by 2040. In October, the UN, however, said current commitments are not enough to stay below the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, and the world is likely to exceed it within the next decade, or at least temporarily. One of the main sticking points this year was fossil fuels. Dozens of countries supported the idea to set up a roadmap to phase out fossil fuels like gas and oil, but others, mainly those whose economies rely heavily on fossil fuel production, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, opposed the call. The EU has championed a global move away from fossil fuels. At home, though, it confronts pushback from member states whose energy systems remain heavily fossil fuel-based.
What I think is interesting, we're also seeing, some of the European countries are not necessarily stepping up when it comes to elements like fossil fuel phase out. So I think there's definitely a question on how united Europe is when it comes to this. And I would like to see Europe really push forward and become more of a united voice around it over the next few months.
Europe's biggest challenge in Brazil wasn't just global diplomacy, but also its own political climate, as some EU member states are questioning parts of the EU's climate targets in the name of competitiveness. The EU wants to become climate neutral by 2050 and views climate action as a driver of competitiveness, not as an obstacle. According to the European Environment Agency, greenhouse gas emissions already fell by 36% in the EU between 1990 and 2023, while gross domestic product grew by nearly 70% over the same period. But businesses see environmental laws as burdensome and inefficient, reflecting a trend away from a focus on the green transition and toward a focus on economic competitiveness and security. The largest conservative political group in the European Parliament, the European People's Party, has been advocating for the simplification of several key climate laws. For example, it wants to revise the planned ban on combustion engines set for 2035, which it says threatens thousands of jobs. The EPP says it remains committed to the EU's goals of cutting emissions and reaching climate neutrality by 2050. But it argues that the path to get there should be reconsidered to ensure that industry, farmers and citizens can realistically meet the targets. The current European Commission, led by President Ursula von der Leyen, has promised businesses it will boost competitiveness through measures like reducing red tape. Some experts note, however, that competitiveness and climate ambition are not mutually exclusive, and that what matters now is clarity about the path forward.
I mean, as civil society and as an organization that's pushing for climate ambition, it's really concerning to us that competitiveness is really coming on the side of slowed climate ambition. But I would also say that I think there's a lot of business and there's a lot of people out there that are also concerned with this. It's clear, and there's been very clear messages that economic benefits are to be had from really strong ambition. Likewise, the public really are pushing for strong ambition and would like to see that come out of Europe. So it's very frustrating to see that at this stage we are still questioning that, and that the needs of the entire market and businesses for clarity on the vision for climate is really at risk.
Do you want to stay up to date with the EU's efforts to tackle the climate crisis while balancing its economic competitiveness? Follow the European Newsroom for more.